Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be looking at ways to use scripting to basically control timed actions inside of Vmix. So, before we get to that, I want to thank everybody for joining, and please welcome you if you have any comments, any questions, any feedback, just put them in the comments below. Also, we would definitely like if you want to call in. We have a uh, website you can just connect to, give us a call, join us on air, and we can have a conversation together here. So, with that, uh, let's get started here. So, when I started this out, I wanted to figure out a way that we could demonstrate using some of the scripting capabilities in Vmix to actually drive automation on its own. And the model we came up with was really something that, in its simplest form, would let you switch between different input sources and also forward or go forward or backwards in a slide deck. So it's fairly basic, but for illustrative purposes, I think it can work pretty well. So let me just show you what that would look like here on my vMix screen. So I just have a button here on a Stream Deck. So I'm going to play one button, press one button, and hold my hands up. So if I press this button, you can see now that we actually have a set of events taking place that are automating the output from vMix. So right now, you can see it's moving through slides. Everything in that large window is all slide based. And it will, I believe, now zoom into the slide. It can go back, then it can zoom into change slides and zoom into the video again. And that's sort of where it ends. But this was designed around using two tools. One, a recorder, basically a way to mark every place that you want in this video to have some action take place. And then the second is, after all those marks are made, to be able to just play this back and have all those actions that you marked triggered at the right times and play out. So before we get into the details on that, let me just take a quick look up at the comments. And so Rudy says, hi, John, and to all the other alchemists. So absolutely, Rudy, I like that term. I'll have to remember that. We'll sort of have that as the the group the group slang for all of us here. So we also have James Redman. James, thank you very much for joining us again. Always great to see you here. And we have Tom Eagle. Tom, great to have you. Thank you. And we have Sisse. Sisse, hello. Thank you for joining us here. All right, so let's jump in. So probably a good place to start with all of this would be looking at the XML that we're going to drive that automation with. And so we have something that's really pretty basic here. We have a root node in the XML. This is just called slide times. So that's was really, when we started, we were thinking of just doing this with slides, but expanded it. So, and then we have a set of elements inside this root, under this root element, that are trigger times, like when do I want the event to take place, and what is the event, what action do I want to have happen. And if you remember when you saw that video, we had slides, we had the video playing, and we had a combo box where you had the video in the upper left-hand corner and the slide in a big space in the lower right-hand corner. And we were moving forward and backwards in the slides. And that's exactly what we have set up here. So if you look at this column in the middle here, those are the actions. And the actions are set up as an attribute of the element. And the element is what's between trigger and slash trigger here. That is the offset in time, milliseconds specifically, from the start of the video where this action should take place. And so this basically was what drove everything after I pressed that play button. It read this and then waited for certain times in the video to happen and triggered specific actions from that. So let's actually look at, now this is a snapshot from earlier today, but it will be useful for what we want to talk about here. This is the Vmix XML file. This is what you get if you go to localhost colon 8088/API. This is what you'll see if you do that when running on your Vmix machine. And so you can see what we have here starting at line 7. So let me highlight this here. So this is the input for the video. And what you'll notice in that is that there are lots of the typical elements that you'd have, name, number, type, title, those types of elements. But we also have things like state, we have position and duration. So these three fields are really unique to video. And the one that's important to us is this one right here called position. So what position is telling us is how far in from the beginning of the video are we? So when we look at this, position is the current playhead. Where's the playhead at in the video? And duration is the full length of the video. So we know this video that we played was just under 24 seconds, 23.64 seconds. So that was the length of the video. And the position is going to tell us in milliseconds where the playhead is in that. And that is the element that we are using to find out when to launch a trigger, to take an action in the video. So this is what we're getting from basically the Vmix XML, and we're doing that continuously in a loop, refreshing that. The other piece, which I thought I would throw in because it's probably useful as well, is if you look at this next input that we outlined here, this is for the slides. And so you can see that in the slides, it has what's our current slide position and what's the duration. So I believe slide position starts at 0. So it'd be, there are 5 slides, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That 0 index comes back again. And it also, and this is important, because you may have wondered why this was in Vmix. It has 2 titles. There's the main title, which is what you have here. So let me sort of click right here at the end. This is the main title. And that main title includes references to what slide number I'm currently at. And there's another one called the short title. And that just has the name of the input as I assigned it, without any sort of embellishment or notation for what slide we're on. And that's important because in order to do this automation, we need to find what inputs the slides and the video are so we can manipulate them. And so if I needed to know through name, it would be a lot more complicated. You could still do it, but it would be a lot more complicated finding the input if I had to sort of just parse down whatever that input, the long title was, to find just the thing that's called slides. And that's what we're using. We're using video to identify the input with the video that's playing. We're using slides as the name to identify the slide input. And we're using something called combo to identify the input with the layers and the combo box on that. So that's how we have everything set up. And so keep this in mind as we jump into the scripting for this next piece here. So before we do that, let me just jump back in again. So we had John Simon join us. John from Montreal, great to have you here. Thank you. We have Samuel saying hello from Norway. Samuel, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you doing this on a Friday night. So we have, Rob Safran. Rob's a good friend of ours from Seattle. Rob, great to have you here. Thank you. So we have Samurai Intellectual joining us from Hollywood. So at the heart of it all there. So Samurai, thank you very much. And we have Otis with a big howdy y'all from Texas. Otis, thank you. So I guess the next step now is let's look at how we create that XML file using scripting. So going to switch over here. Let's see if I can go to the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to use XML tools to manipulate what will essentially be a file to add all of these actions at specific times into XML. So as we usually do when we start this up, we go in and we load the Vmix model, which is important because that's going to give us everything we need to know internally about the inputs inside of Vmix. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create 3 XML nodes that we need inside of the XML we're creating. So the first one is the root node. So that's basically the base node inside of XML. So sort of in Vmix, that would be the Vmix in angle brackets slash Vmix at the bottom. That's sort of giving you all of the things in a root that will then be captured inside of Vmix. So for us, we have a root node that we set up. And then we have what we call the next offset node. So anytime we want to write the offset, this will be the next offset that the video player will be working against. And so in order to write that as XML, that's that trigger with the offset in milliseconds in it. That's what we're putting there. And then we have the action node, which we use to manipulate the attribute inside of the element, which is the offset node, for setting up the action that we want to have happen. And the way this will work is that we're going to press a button to trigger this script every time we want a specific action to happen. And that will get recorded in this XML file. So we start by finding out the details about the video the input that has the video we're going to be using. So we start that out by just saying the name of the input is string, and we're going to set up a place for keeping that as a number, because that's how a lot of the functions inside Vmix will work. And so the thing we're doing now is here we're getting the XML model from Vmix, loading that in, and we are finding the input with video and getting the number. So that's what this block of code here is doing. It will grab the XML node. It will, if it finds it, it's great. And if it doesn't find it, it will just output an error. So this is basically asking Vmix, find the XML node inside Vmix with the name video, which is the video input name here. And so we have that, and it assigns that number. Now, we set up the XML document next that we're going to use to write this information to. So we know the input, and so here we're going in and we're saying, let's create a new document with the event offset times, the offsets inside of this video that we're going to trigger this action against. And we're saving that with this file path here. And so this is just a XML file that I have locally on my system. And so the first thing we're going to do is, because if this is our first button press, we may need to create this from scratch. There is no file there. If it isn't, if I'm, well into tracking the actions I want, then this file will already exist and I just need to append to it. So that's what we're doing in this next section of code right here. So if you remember, we talked about using try catch and end try. What try will do is when you execute a command inside of try, if it succeeds, it will just end the try. And if it fails, it'll do whatever is in the catch segment of the try. And so that's what we're doing here. We are going and saying, load up this file. And if that fails, that means the file doesn't exist. So what we do then in the next piece is we actually create the file. So we talked about, we set up the root node, and so we create that root element that we need here called slide times. And then we're appending that root node to our event offset times, which is the XML file that we opened up, the XML document we opened up. And then we're just turning around and saying, save this. So we have event offset times dot save. And so we're just writing this file that we have out to the file system. And what makes this so powerful is I do not have to do all the string manipulation here to make it into well-structured XML. I just have a series of commands that let me append elements and attributes to this XML file that we've created and then just write it out again. So this is what we're doing through all of this. It makes it so much simpler to work with XML. So now if the file existed, we just skip past all this. If it didn't exist, we now have that file created. And so what we are doing as our next step here is we're just saying, okay, let's just grab, because in case that root node uh, was existing already, we have to read it. So we're just saying, get the first child of event offset times, which is that XML document. We read that in and set up our root node. And now we're starting to build that first element inside of this file. So we're going in to look at, now we're back into the Vmix XML. So we're looking and saying, look at, in the video node, what is the item named position? What's the value of that? Remember, position is the position of the playhead in milliseconds inside our video. So we're pulling that in as a value and saving it to time offset. That's the thing we need to store inside the element in the event offset. Now we are going and just doing a quick set of assignments. The first is we're creating an element called trigger. So that would be in the angled brackets, trigger/trigger. And that tells us it's an action. So what is the action? So we're creating another XML node called, which is an attribute. And this is called action. And so we've created these two. Now we just have to make assignments to them. So for the offset, the time offset, we're going in and we're saying we need to assign that here. And we've already saved that. That's a string that we got right from Vmix. And then for the action, we're assigning a value of next because we want, in this case, to just move to the next slide. And that's all we're doing. So in writing this now, we have all these things set. And we assign them now into sort of internally, because I mentioned you don't have to do all the string manipulation, but you have to tell the code, in the code, where you want to place these. So you're saying, okay, set the name of the action node as an attribute inside of next offset node. And we're going to take that now with all built, with the time offset and the action. We're going to append this as a child to the root node. So now we've had that, that root node, and now we have something trigger with an action after that, and we save this out. So it looks a little complex, but it's actually very, very straightforward. And it happens one time. So I press a button, and this is going to go, and it's going to say what action at what time, and write that out to an XML file. So as long as this video is playing, I can keep adding different actions that will be picked up at different times. So if you actually just look at the Stream Deck that I have here, what I can show you is that we have multiple buttons specifically for the different actions. So I have next and previous, which is how we would control the slides going back and forth. And then I also have, what do I want to display as the output? I want to display the combo box with both the video and the slides. I just want to display the slide, or I just want to display the video. So this is what we did for this, because it's a good example. This could be something much different, and we'll talk about some things in the post show that we were originally thinking of using this for. But this, I think, for illustrative purposes, that's exactly what we do. We have that same script assigned where we're either assigning the action next, the action previous, the action combo, slide, or video. And that's the only difference in the code that we just did. And all of this will let you record this out. And again, that is, if you look back at the XML we have here, this is exactly what we did here when we set this up. That's what we were writing out with that script. So now let's think, though, about how we want to work with this to play it back. So I'm going to go to this script over here. And we're doing a few more things in this script because we now need to know the inputs for all three of the video slides, and the combo box. And we need to then be reading this file and triggering events. So let's talk a bit about what we're doing there. So we start out again, reading the XML document from Vmix. Standard practice for all of us now. Uh, Now, because we're using more than just the video input that we use when we recorded events, we now need to have spaces set up for video slides and the combo box. And we still need to know where the video offset is as a string. But now, because we're doing some comparison work, we're going to be doing this also as an integer. So when we read that playhead position, we're also going to have to know uh, not just use it as a string, but what is the actual integral value so we can do numerical comparisons. And so just like we did that for the time, the position coming out of the video, we're doing the same thing for the offset that we're reading from the XML file that's going to trigger the actions we're setting up. So we have a string, which we need because that's the way we're reading it from XML, and then we're going to convert that to an integer as well. And so these are just going to be the variables we're using as different counters. So, what's our current trigger counter, the active trigger, and the trigger action. So these are just things that we're doing as either counters or placeholders for us to take actions in code. So here's where we get into everything. So again, we're going to identify, like we did in the first script, we're going to identify where each one of these inputs are. This is for finding the video. Make sure we can find the video input. The next one is for finding the slide input. And if you remember, I mentioned short title versus title. In this case, we are looking at the short title with just the slide input name called slides. So that makes it easier to find than worrying about parsing inside of the slides plus the slide number we're on. And we're doing that here. And then we're getting, again, right here at the end, we're getting the input for our combo box that has both the slides and the video displayed on it. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're just identifying where we were writing this XML file with all the triggers, set that up as our path, and we're going to load that into an XML document called trigger times. So once we do this load command, that entire file now is sitting in memory, and we're going to be able to use that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create what we've talked about in the past called an XML node list. And so what a node list is an in-memory indexable object that has all the XML nodes that match some type of criteria. So in this case, we're just looking for all of the nodes that have all of the elements inside the root node that are triggers, that are XML triggers. And so we create a XML node list of those triggers. And from that, we can get a count. And this count is going to tell us how many events are we going to need to worry about when we play back all of the actions. And so that's what this count.count is. And we write this out here. That was something we were using for reference. And now we're going to start to initialize things and actually get going to start playing this video and triggering all the events. So we're going to set the video offset initially out, the variable where we track that playhead position. We're just going to set that to 0. And we're going to do things to reset all of these inputs. So we're going to restart the slide number, which brings the slides back to slide 1. We're going to reset the position number of the video input. So that brings the playhead back to the beginning. And then we're going to actually do a play of the video, which will kick off this video playing and triggering the events. And you notice we just put a sleep in there. We found that if you didn't, these things would not necessarily finish before the rest of the code starts to run. So there could be occasions where it would sort of run on top of itself. So we put the sleeps in there as extra. I hate doing that from a coding point of view, but there is no way really to know, unless I sort of looped and read them to find if it went back to 0 for the positions on these things. But this was just an easier way to guarantee that we had enough buffer to make sure all of those resets happen. And so now with the video started, we're going to start triggering the event. So this video is actively playing at this point in the script. So we are doing a loop with finding what's the next trigger we're going to have to launch and taking that action. And we're doing this by saying there's an active trigger, the next one we're reading, and it goes from 0 to trigger count -1. So XML node lists are 0 index. We talked about 0 index versus 1 index. They are 0 index. So that's why we're doing it from 0 and trigger count -1. That will cover all of the triggers that we need to handle in this. So what we're doing is we're taking and reading from this trigger action list. We're taking this first, the inner text, which is the active trigger, and that's our trigger time. So we're actually pulling that out here, and then we're taking the trigger action. So at this time, this is the action that I need to take, one of those 5 possible actions. So inside this for loop, which is for each trigger, what we now have to do is we have to wait until the video has passed the time of that trigger to say, okay, this trigger should fire now. Because before that, if that trigger happens at a later time, the video hasn't gotten to the point where it needs to trigger the event. So we're waiting until that the playhead is greater than or equal to the trigger time. And that's basically what we're going to do in a while loop. So inside this for loop, we basically have this while loop, which lets us wait. And in this, we need to keep asking Vmix, where is the playhead at in this video? And is my currently selected trigger time less than that or equal to that? And that's exactly what we do. You have to reload the Vmix XML each time in this loop. When it does that, that takes a snapshot, and you can manipulate things in that snapshot. But if you need to keep updating them, you need to keep reloading that XML. So we do the load XML for the Vmix API, and we are pulling out the video input with, this is just belt and suspenders here, making sure we're doing the right thing. And so we now know the video input, and we pull from that video input the position that it's at, and we are converting it to an integer because I said we have to do a numerical comparison. And that numerical comparison is what we're doing up here in the while loop. So each time we pass through, what we're doing is we're setting things up to say, here's the playhead, here's where I'm at. Wait a moment, because that sleep stops it from hammering background all the time. We don't need that. This is, just 100 milliseconds, so 1/10 of a second. And when we hit this end while, it loops back up here and makes the test. So it's basically within 100 milliseconds of doing the test, it comes up here and says, should I get out or not? If not, if it's still not there, it'll keep going through the while loop, and you'll see the position of the playhead move up. If it is, then it's going to fall out of this while loop, and it's essentially going to go and there are different ways to do this. We just have a set of if-thens for what to do with different triggers. So if the action, which is the action we wanted to take at this time, is a next, then we go to the next slide. If it's a previous, we go to the previous slide. And these are all standard Vmix shortcut function calls. So we're doing all this stuff for the slides, and then we can also switch to the inputs. So that lets us do a merge into the combo or the video or the slide input. And we do whatever's there, and then we loop back and wait for the next triggered event to happen. So this as a sort of a flow here is very simple, but this is something with all of these actions. You could have any code in here that you wanted and create any sets of actions, even very complex ones. We just did simple things to sort of show how that would work off. But this is now going to loop through until all of the trigger actions have completed. The for loop has gone through the full count of triggers, and then it's just going to end the script, and the script will fall out. So this will let this play out fully. So I think, as we went through this, there's a couple of a couple of key points is first, you don't want to create and manage the XML as strings. You really want to use these XML functions in here because it will make your life so much easier. Uh, Setting this up also against the video was just a shortcut way of doing things which basically are going against some type of timer that is running in the background. So when you think about this, don't limit your thinking to just linking actions to a particular video. Uh, this can be much more general than that. And the other thing is that when we do all this stuff, you can just get to manipulate the XML in code and then just write it out as a file. And then it saves it as a text-based XML file. And what makes that great is if you wanted to do something where you wanted to tweak something a little bit, you could just go in there into the code and say, okay, I'm going to move that time up a little bit. It came in late. Uh, and let me actually show you when we create this file exactly how this would work. We have this over here and with the Stream Deck. And so all we're doing, let me sort of move this over here, pop this up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this file. This is the file that we're using, SA slide times. I'm going to delete that. So now we don't have any file there anymore. And so if I go back in to Vmix, and let me do Vmix and the Stream Deck over here so you can see the Vmix interface. What I'm going to do here, yeah, that works. So I set this video up here. And so what I'm going to do before I start is say, I actually want this to start on the video. So I'm just going to press this. And so now I've created the file, and I've added a marker, a trigger to say, go into the video to start. Then I'm going to play this. And so I give it a chance to start. I'm going to say, now let's switch to the combo box. And what I'd like to do, that combo box is a slide. So we're going to go to the next slide. Now we're going to go to the next slide. Now we're going to wait again and go to the next slide. Now I want to go to the slide that's there. I want to jump to the previous slide. I want to go to the combo box. And we're done. So what I've done there is I have created all of those trigger points just by pressing buttons as the video played. And that's how we built this. And so, there is, lots of different ways this could be done. But this type of approach means that this is something that you could use without a lot of attention. So if you had somebody that was giving a large presentation that you were recording, you could, in theory, just keep pressing a button to put times for each of the slide changes or other types of events, and then use that later on to create a different end recorded video for a guest. For a client that may want to see that for a guest that was talking. So different ways to do that. But if I come back over here now and let's open this, you can see this is the new XML file that I just created. And you have all the offsets here. And if I want to go and play this back, let me see if I can, we'll just hit play now. And let me actually, let's go to the Vmix screen here, and I'm just going to show, we'll change things around, and I'll make it so that it's not set up the way it would normally start. So if I press play, it now jumps in to the video and goes through all of those steps that we set up. So it's just like we did before, but with different timing and different transitions at different places. So hopefully there's some different ideas this gives to everybody. Let me jump back before we leave here. So we have Guy's been jumping in, asking what's cooking, and he does have some place. So there is a do case or a select case. He's put up different ways. I just use the if thens because we were really just doing single things there, and I thought from a clarity point of view, it would be just easier for people to see if this, then that. But absolutely, I mean, what a do case or select case will let you do is basically say, uh, take and say select and what type of action, and then I can then basically for each one of these actions say, if the action is this, it will do all these things, and then break out. If the action is this, it will do all these things, and then break out. So Guy is definitely right. That would, if I were writing this as sort of professional code for something I would deploy, that would certainly be the way I would end up doing it. And primarily because it becomes a lot more manageable and easier to expand. And in some ways, its readability is better for somebody that's comfortable with that construct. Uh, Probably, we could have added that here as as another part of what we're covering to learn something new. But I appreciate Guy jumping in on that because that is definitely, uh, you know, a better technical way to do what we were doing right at the end. So hopefully everybody found this interesting. Uh, we will, you know, wrap this up and then go to the post show. But as I always, I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join. I know there's people coming to us from different parts of the world. So for some of you, this is late on a Friday night. So I appreciate that all of you choose to spend that time with us. So if you can't hang around for the post show, I'll see you next week. If so, I'll see you in a couple of seconds. Take care, everyone. Bye. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy Post Show here. So there was a few things when we did this where we actually started with uh, a different thought, but then felt that it probably would be too complicated to do in aggregate and involved a lot more than the code that we showed here. But what we were thinking uh, was to use the same basic approach to create an EDL file, an edit decision list. So an edit decision list basically is a structured file that has all the edit points that would take place inside something like Final Cut, Premiere, DaVinci Resolve. And so the thinking was you could set something up where during a show, when you switch the show, you just have these switches set on buttons. So go to cameras, go to multi-boxes. All of those things would write out sort of times and actions that we then have another script pull at the end and write out as a well-structured EDL file and save all the elements that you need. So all of the different assets that would be inside the production, you'd be able to capture that and save all that. We just felt that was probably too much to do in a single show and involved a lot of different moving parts. But as a construct, as a concept, this is something you could think of applying here. So say you wanted to do something where every time the presenter swaps slides, you you just recorded that. Uh, that is something you could do and then use that later on if you needed to edit this to say, now I have the offsets from the beginning of every slide transition that happened during the show. And this could be something where you do like when I press record, that creates the file and writes that initial uh, and saves an initial time marker. And then everybody else after that, they go off that time marker and produce a delta. So you could definitely do things like that, where even if you had this as a camera that was running, that offset, because there's a file there, you'd be able to line that up with that. So I think lots of different ways to work with this. And more than anything else, I think the things that we discussed regarding manipulating XML, the concept that there are roots, elements, and attributes, and that you can manipulate them using functions and methods inside of objects and methods inside of uh, Visual Basic and .NET, and then write that out at the very end. Again, this is things that are useful very generally. And XML will definitely be your friend for some of these things. I certainly would, like to do some more stuff with JSON as well. But the point I've made in the past, the thing holding me back from sort of jumping in with that, is that there aren't these tools in .NET 2.0, which is I think where Vmix script support cuts off, to really manipulate JSON the way you can XML. So in my mind, even though I like JSON more as a structured language, the tools to work with XML are much better right now in Vmix. So definitely stuff that we can hope improves in the future. I would love to see broader support for .NET inside of Vmix, but there's there's always next year's version, so we'll hopefully see some stuff that will supercharge some of the scripting we can do. So let me jump back to the comment section here. So I have so so I hope I'm saying your name, Opeyemi. So thank you for joining us. Glad you're finding this useful. Uh, I have JP. Greetings from South Africa. JP, I am very grateful that you're taking the time to join us here, and hopefully this is giving you something that you can start to work with in your own productions and the things you're doing. And I also have Tom Eagle mentioning, saying he's currently using Vmix for video projection of the Silent Sky Community Theater. So the video, the video we were using was appropriate for the play. So yeah, I mean these are interesting kinds of things. So if you had certain things that you needed to trigger off of, like a button push, this would let you push a single button and time things out where you could have them happen across a multimedia type of production where I need certain things on screens on the side. I need a rear projection to change, and I may need to trigger sound effects or other things. So you could do these things because once you are in that script, I could just do HTTP request and trigger actions on another thing. So I could use this to trigger actions on that TriCaster, uh, and to do those actually against this video plane. So this could be something where I have multiple videos and I'm controlling another switcher or another projector or MIDI controls, downstream outside of Vmix itself. So lots of different ways you can pull these things together once you sort of think of it in more general terms as sort of triggers actions, and those actions can be anything that you can describe in VB and .NET. So let's see. So Samurai was asking, if you cut to a camera, is there a timer running on that also? So the way we did this is we were using Vmix's own position offset that's stored in the Vmix XML. But there are lots of different ways that we could do this. So for instance, if I were to start to record my Vmix production, I could set a time to save that as a dynamic value. And every time I hit a trigger, I don't have to be doing this against the video. When I hit that trigger, it can read the system time, compare it to that initial time, and just put an offset in there. So you could actually be recording offsets against more general events. So if I switch to a camera, I could do that same thing. Whenever I bring this camera up, it grabs that time, and I use that to record offsets to what we did on that camera. It could also do things like isochord the camera. So if I knew this, I could use this to create a file which said, isochord that camera as long as I'm on it, start that up, go and record these offsets, and then as soon as I switch off that camera, stop the recording. So I believe there are shortcuts for those. I'd have to verify. But this is the type of stuff you could do. But there isn't a way you could do it directly. There's no sort of native timer inside of Vmix from doing this. As Guy was pointing that out, there isn't there isn't something in there. But if you do the cut through a script, you have the ability to do a lot more. So there's always some way to get close to what you want. Uh, and I think that's why I think as we look at what we're hoping for in scripting and shortcuts uh, for the next version of Vmix, that we see some of these things added. And for all of us, I think it just makes the productions we can do a lot richer. So so, are there any questions? Because I know I've been talking a lot in this post show, just sort of going over some things in general. But I want to make sure if there are other questions out there that we are covering them, and that this is addressing things that you may actually want to be doing practically right now. So while I give a chance, because I know questions can take a while, this is with the stream it could be delayed a bit. Uh, we should be we should be on. We should be on for next week. We're expecting to do a show. The week after, we'll be traveling, so we may or may not. It really depends on where we're up to. Uh, but part of our trip is because we're going to be doing the initial betas for our new Live to Air 12 product, which lets you bring in up to 12 remote guests in a single system. So that's something that we'll definitely talk more about once we do the rollout, and I'll share with all of you guys. But definitely something that has been keeping us busy. So let's see. So Samurai Intellectual was asking, are you in touch with the Vmix guys with your suggestions? I don't have any particular in. I have shared a few things in the past. This isn't something where I think they know there's a lot of pent up demand for these things. You could probably if you hit you know poor Tim up at any point in the day, you probably could rattle off the top 5 things that people have been asking him. But yeah, I mean, it probably would make sense if I put this together as just a list of things that I found. So thank you. But I do think that Vmix does have a pretty good awareness. But I also know they're a lean company. I mean, there's not a massive organization behind them. So as another small company, I have a lot of sympathy for trying to figure out what you need to prioritize and get in the product, even though sometimes, there are very good reasons for having new features in, but you just can't prioritize them above other things that are more important to being able to sell and support your community. So, yeah, so Guy mentioned that. That's a good point because there's 2 things. One of the things is when you make a suggestion, uh, people get a chance to sort of vote it up, and that gives everybody in not just the folks in Vmix themselves, but it gives other people in the broader Vmix community the chance to sort of weigh in on their priorities for things. So, to Guy's point, if you do submit it, it would be something definitely to submit through the forums and you know because they do have a features request section, and people can upvote it, and you sort of can solicit that if you're in other groups. I know people have posted things as suggestions, and then asked people to upvote that to see if they can get it to the level where Martin and the team there at Vmix would say, yeah, there's enough of a demand that will focus resources there. So So, yeah, and the more detail you can put in there, the better. The Vmix guys are very responsive. You just mentioned that the more, you know, if the how and the why you'd want something, definitely would help because it contextualizes it, and it means that for all of us, it means that we've thought through the real use case and how this would apply. So So let's see. So Samar just asked, he says, is my background as a TD or a switcher? It's actually as neither. so, so my background is actually as a programmer, and I have been part of the New York City startup scene for probably the last 30 plus years, 35 years. Uh, so I've started multiple companies, and I've mostly focused on the financial space. Uh, and so did a lot of things around information processing and doing information analysis. Uh, and from there, there was a lot of math involved in that. But I always used to do some marketing using video. And what I decided was I wanted to move into a space I really loved, uh, which is, everything around video, something that's always been close to my heart. So in this next company I started, NeuralNet, which we started about 10 years ago, uh, I decided to just go all into video and was I don't really program much anymore. There are much younger, much smarter people in the company that do that now. But what I focus more on is sort of product design and the user experience, the workflow, how people would want to interact with the product. So I tend to think more in the context of things people want to achieve. And so that's why actually doing scripting is fun. It sort of reconnects me with code again. And so I mean, I just saw Opa Yemi just put something up. So this is one of those. What's the best? There is no best. I mean, I'll just start right there. I think each production tool has advantages, and they also all have disadvantages. So we use Vmix, we use TriCaster. Those are the two that, for producing the show, those are the two that we definitely use all the time. Uh, we also use OBS. OBS drives all the signage that we'd have inside the set when we do things with signage, and it's also sort of a good auxiliary tool. Uh, we don't use Wirecast, but the design of Wirecast is excellent for people that are less experienced and that really just need to have a simple way to switch between sources. So it works good in the volunteer space, whether it's people that are doing things for charities, for religious organizations that have large volunteer groups that will actually run the production. So they can definitely benefit. The probably the two most robust options out there would be the TriCaster and Vmix. Vmix is far more technically flexible. I can do things in Vmix that I couldn't begin to do in the TriCaster because I have access to things like scripting. But the TriCaster is much easier to use if you have people that crew your productions, where they sit down and they have a physical switcher, a control surface to do the physical switching, and everything is sort of laid out in pre-configured blocks. That way I can sit anybody down there, sort of do a quick walkthrough, and they can do that. I could emulate that in Vmix, but as a general rule, Vmix tends to be something that works excellently for personal switching, where I have everything set up exactly the way I want to use it. And I know where it all is, and that's really all that matters, because I'm not going to have somebody in here next Tuesday switching my show, and then somebody the following week that's different switching the show. It's something I would typically run. So uh, this is one of those things where you have to really play with them, take time today, and make sure you know what's going on. So, someone was asking how many people are involved in the production. So, we have uh, myself on set, and I have two other people. One is doing switching, and that's done on the TriCaster. So everything that's sort of going out to stream. Uh, I have a second person who's doing all of the social media and the lower thirds. So that's all being handled on Vmix and using Vmix and Vmix Social to do that. So uh, so that's how we set up here and operate. It can be run by sort of one person over there and myself here. Uh, if I had to do this all myself and talk, it would depend on the subject matter. If I had to get this down to a solo production, it can be difficult where you're trying to think about something in more depth, like when I'm going through code, and then think about switching or tracking what people are saying in the comments. That so it's, I think it's still a small production, but it's something where we're sort of going from what we knew best when we started, which was TriCaster. We've expanded with Vmix, and we're really happy with both of those. Uh, and it's funny because people have asked me. They said, if I could pick one, like, and this was all I could use going forward, what would that pick be? And as a personal choice, I would pick Vmix. And I know it sounds funny, uh, because I really do love the TriCaster. But Vmix as software means that I can keep upping my hardware, and they keep doing updates for the software. So I know I have better hardware to run it on, and I can get a better software over the years as I continue working with them. With the TriCaster, they continually evolve hardware and software, but you sort of buy in at any given point to a snapshot of that. So you get the hardware, and they'll continue to upgrade the software for that version of hardware that you have. And so when they come out with new capabilities, you wouldn't necessarily expect to get those in older hardware. That would go into the new hardware. So that's sort of giving a personal balance between the two and why I would do that. And Opeyemi asked another important point. He says, why do you still use OBS when you have Vmix? Well, the first thing is, in Vmix, we have multiple Vmix licenses. So we have 3 4K licenses that we use here. Uh, but the thing about OBS is it does some things that Vmix doesn't in different ways. So OBS is scene driven. So if you want to do signage, working with scenes can be really nice. I can just say, go to scene A, scene B, scene C, and it can do everything I need to cut up. The other thing is OBS is free. So it has a lot of capability for a free offering. Uh, it has a lot of nice features in it as well. So part of working with OBS is that it's the tool that sits on everybody's system because we don't need individual licenses for it. And it's easy to put to use for a lot of little niche roles where it isn't worth using, like dedicating a Vmix license to something, but for OBS, it would be perfect. So that's really it. I mean, I think, when you deal with people, especially smaller companies that produce software, you want to be very conscientious when it comes to respecting their licenses and what you do. So, we have the number of licenses we need for the things we would use Vmix for, and everything else, we sort of take a step down from there. So Summer asking about, have you tested with Vmix in the cloud? Absolutely, yes, and it works exceptionally well in the cloud. If you're going to use Vmix in the cloud, I would definitely look at Joe DeMax has central control. That would make your entire life so much easier because it will let you basically tie in everything you want to do to Stream Decks locally, driving Vmix in the cloud. So we have a lot of people that have been setting up our live to air product and using it with Vmix in the cloud for deployment. Uh, but also, I mean, there is a software-only version of the TriCaster, which is a software license. It's not from NewTek now; it's from VizRT. I think it's the VizVector. They have 2 versions. There's that and a higher-end one that also works very nicely for cloud deployments. So that's another thing that if you are in the TriCaster universe and want to use something deployed at AWS, you could go with the VizVector line and sort of move in that same direction. for both of those. So Joe DeMac Central Control, excellent excellent product. We use it here, and definitely would uh, be looking to add that to the mix. So someone said, yeah, yeah, he has it already. Yeah, I mean it's great price and great capability. And Joe's a great guy. You need help with it, you can get on, and Joe will respond. So so uh, so OPM is asking, how does it work Vmix in the cloud? So it's th- this is more than I could probably do in a quick overview. Uh, there is actually documentation that Amazon provides about deploying uh, vMix in the cloud. So it basically, you have to get your instance configured correctly, and you then need to make sure that you can connect to it remotely using something like Teradici or Parsec or you know other tools that give you that sort of remote desktop in. Remote desktop is not something you're supposed to use, like Microsoft's remote desktop. So don't use that because it'll cause all sorts of problems with vMix. But this gives you, so there are some options there. And then you're using things like your Stream Deck to control it, but you can also use sort of a mouse and keyboard. You're connected. And then, I forget the exact term in the cloud, but basically you can set a group of instances to all work together. It's sort of like a local cloud that you would set up there. And that's where you'd set up other boxes that you needed vMix to talk to. Part of doing this would also be using something like SRT if you're bringing in cameras. So that's another thing. But Samurai was asking, could we do a show on that? And I think that would probably be a very good show to do, to sort of show people how to get that set up and all the different moving pieces. It might actually be more than a single show because there are a lot of different parts, both to deployment and then how you'd actually run a production. But we'll definitely look into that. We do this as a sideline, so we write code as our main our main way to make a living. So uh, setting this up would be something we definitely would need to carve out enough time to do it justice. But thank you for for suggesting that, because it is something we definitely would consider adding as a show. So yeah, so it's a month-long series. Some of these, some of the things we have planned. I mean, we've had things that we've had out there. Uh, we we had the initial kernel of it, months ago, and some of them are just they're more complicated, and it's just taking us longer. So we don't get to do every show, as soon as we'd love to. But we're always looking for show ideas, and that is a great one. So. Uh, so Opiyemi says, I will really be expecting for show. So Opiyemi, thank you. We'll try to get to this in the mix of things. We do have some other things that we have scheduled before that, but this is definitely something that we'll try to squeeze in before the end of the year if we can, because we definitely would like to cover this, and given the interest, I think it's a good fit with everything we talk about here. So. Uh, So JP was asking, has anybody figured out how to bring Google Doc into vMix as opposed to a Google Sheet? I have not yet. I'm not sure how that would work, because I know that Google Doc will, the underlying structure of Google Doc, I believe, is XML, or an XML-like structure. So I do not know if it would be possible to read that and bring that in. Uh, that would be interesting. So I have to research that. But give us something else. I love the suggestions here, guys. this is excellent. But okay, I think we're probably just about ready to wrap up here. So again, thanks everybody for hanging around for the post show here. Uh, definitely yeah, so just Guy is saying that Google Sheets is to be used for data source. Yeah, so I don't, that's correct. And we looked at a couple of things with that. I just don't know yet if there would be any way to pull that in, because Google does have their own API. So I'd have to see if there is a way to talk with that through scripting, through basically .NET on the vMix side, and pull those in and write those out. That's where so Guy, that's where my head was at as soon as he said that. Not so much that I could pull it in as a data source, but that I could read it from a script. That if I knew enough about how to do that connection, I would be able to pull that in. And if it's underlined structures XML, might be some interesting things to do there. So if you can figure out anything, please let me know, because you are truly the wizard of all of these things here with scripting. So I would love to see if that could be a possibility. But all right, everyone. Why don't we give this a wrap for today and see if we can all get together again next week for another show. It was great having all of you here. I really appreciate you making the time. So until next week, take care. Be safe. See you then.